everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mixtur, for having me. And today I will just try to jump straight away to some material that I prepared for you. I would like to share with you and speak a little bit about the work that is very important to me. It's one of my most important works for 6 electric guitars with electronics. It's a 1-hour piece. Of course, we don't have time to listen to it all. There is a recording on YouTube. There will be a new recording very soon in the next weeks, coming online as well. But today I would like to focus on certain moments, especially at the beginning of the piece, and to talk a little bit about something that I call sound space and how composing sound space is important for me, and we will look at the beginning of the piece as a local example of it. So before I jump into the score, this is UFA Sextet. I'm sure you know at least half of the band, maybe even all 6 of them. They are incredible human beings with who I'm so lucky to have worked over the course of now more than 2 years. As you've seen on the first slide, and some of you already, I think the score is passing. You can see as well the work is called Asymptotic Freedom 2, so there is Asymptotic Freedom 1. It's a big work in stages. The first piece was 12-minute piece, which we were working on during the pandemic, locked up in rooms in different locations, so everything was online, and for the second work we'll have come together and premiered in Darmstadt last year. So, as I said, there are 6 electric guitars, and every guitar is prepared in a slightly different way, but every guitar has a rubber band attached in a certain way on the string to change the resonance, but prior to that there is also a scordatura, a certain chord, and microtonal relationship between the instruments and the parts, because the huge focal point of the piece is exploration and style and resonance. Resonance is very important to me. I'm going to talk a lot about it. So this is just to give you an idea. I'm not sure the quality of the image is good enough for you to see the pedal, but each guitarist has his unique setup of electronic pedals. So let's jump to the next slide. So they are preparing and removing rubber bands throughout the piece. So what happens, I'm sure many of you know, the sound of the prepared detuned strings together connected with a knot, they produce sound reminiscent of a bell, or church bell maybe in some sense. It depends also on the settings of the pedal. So that was what I was interested in, and I really like to work with different objects, found objects, and prepare instruments with objects as well. For me, it's an extension of the instrument that allows me to find my own way into the world of the instrument and to find something personal. So the first thing that I would like to talk about, space and time and timeline. So, as I said, resonance was very, very important for me, and initially we were thinking of a piece being like a walk piece for public and for the musicians to be in different rooms, but of course after pandemic we all wanted to sit in the same room together as traditional as possible. But still several ideas were very, very important for me, like for example, geography of sound. And even just thinking about the space where the piece will be performed, I really like this idea that might be maybe a bit cheesy, and I don't even care if it's a true scientific one, but maybe some of you heard of this theory that once played in the room, the sound continues forever. We just at some point stop hearing the vibrations, but they continue. And I really like this poetry in this idea, because for me it connects to the idea of memory of the space. And we are all dealing with memories when we listen to music, when we are composing, when we are not composing. And I was imagining in my mind the space with the six amazing human beings, guitar players, and how do we start the sound? And here comes another thing that I think about a lot, is the beginning. I'm sure a lot of you also, when you compose, think a lot on how do we start? How do we break the silence? And is it even really a silence if we think about that poetic theory of the sound infinitely lasting in the room, and how charged is the room once we enter it? And a lot of artists, visual artists and sound artists, were working with that idea of the charged space. My obsession with the resonances and all these prepared chords made me also think about what is the resonance, what is the physicality of sound, and of course familiar ADSR scheme on the sound: attack, decay, sustain, release. So what's interesting is when does the sound actually stops? Like if I were to make a clap in the room, where is this threshold where the absence, so-called absence of sound, becomes the memory of sound? When do I continue thinking about sound instead of listening to the sound? So this is where I started. This is what led me through the process of composing and playing with the guitar a lot, hours and hours. So I'm not a guitar player, but just exploring the instrument. And for me, that space, the sound doesn't stop. It has this trail that continues. And I was thinking about this ensemble of 6 guitarists as a monochrome palette of one meta instrument, so that when the trail of one part of this meta instrument fades out, before it disappears, I wanted another one to pick up on it and somehow create a note between these two resonances, to create a sort of a spider net, and some of you maybe also scored, even saw some imagery inside that communicates the symbolism of these conceptual ideas that I think are very important to communicate for me to the performers. So for me, that memory of sound is still continuation of that envelope that connects to the space that precedes the sound. And so even in the score, the first section that we're going to listen to, it's 7.5 minutes of the whole section, but the first beginning of it, a mini section, for me it's the beginning of time before the timeline starts. So I think it's important to appreciate or to take into consideration the idea of the timeline, but really what is more important is to differentiate time from the timeline, because our experience of time in a music piece can be really, really different depending on many, many different parameters and things. And so the last maybe thing to mention is geography of sound. So of course the musicians are dispositioned in a certain way that the sound travels, and it's, for me, connects to the way the resonances and reflections of sound travels through space. And I will talk about it a little bit later, but before that, I would like you to listen to the piece, not the full piece, but a section of it, so that when I talk about specific sections, you will have your own memory of it. It's pretty soft section, so I hope you won't be disturbed. So what was going on here? In the beginning, you could hear the complex sound of the feedback or manipulating feedback. Actually, I would prefer the sound interacting with the feedback. And not just the feedback alone, but the interaction happens with the chain of pedals, including Modefuger, Wawa pedal, filter, and feedbacker. That's very important. So with the help of Wawa and the low cut, Samuel was able to control the pitch of the feedback. And more than that, with the Modefuger, we managed to find this texture that reminded me of something like a butterfly, which for me is not just this poetic imagery, but more than that, it communicates the sense of fragility. As we know, working with feedback could be really voice inside, and also the sound sort of escapes, and you're always on the edge trying to make it sing. And this voice that is inside this texture is very important for me, because for me, and of course you have to imagine this is a very narrow stereo field, and in the whole you're surrounded by 6 guitar players, and the sound really travels from different directions. And it's, I see these 6 guitars, they are a lot of different things throughout the piece. The piece is 1 hour long, but the key point is the singing guitar for me, is this notion of voice that is still there. So, and this voice inside inside the beginning, part 6, for me it's like the voice wrapped in a cocoon, and something like trembling, and something that just comes to life. And so this section, as I mentioned, for me it's the beginning of time, something that precedes the attack, because the attack in this piece, the first pluck that comes, it comes only on page 3, it had to be prepared. So I wanted to charge the space with those vibrations by reading vibrations from the feedback in the room. And then, of course, this texture, it also contains the presence, it has a strong presence of noise as well. So let me see the next slide. So yeah, the sound vibrations that have internal, in this specific sound, let's call it a butterfly sound, so that we understand each other, regular rhythm, but the pitch is changing, and there is of course a noise component to it. And then what you heard, I hope you heard it, there was just the rhythmical noise coming in and out with the tremolo pedals. So for me, these effect pedals, like we call them, they are not effect pedals. For me, it's the extension of the sound idea. If they don't extend, translate, or communicate, they are not there. It's a very important rule for that I put for myself, especially for this piece. And so I try to, so there's this complex sound in the cocoon, let's say, and then I try to pull the threads, some threads of it one by one, or sometimes 2 at a time, to create, first of all, to create the distance between the components of the first sound, to change perspective, our listening perspective on it, so that we become aware of, yes, there is this presence of rhythmical breathing, rhythmical noise that comes in, but at the same time it is connected with the other sound that still continues to fly. And then on the second page, you heard the magnets, the sound of magnets that brought with it more or less constant rhythm, because it was swaying right above the pickup, so it always did the same, and mostly constant pitch. So you see that some things stay the same, some things change, and so they extrapolate and come from different directions, so that we create this sounding crystal in the room. And so this was the first vertical gesture, the gesture of a plaque. And for myself, I connected this world with the world of electric guitar as we know it, but not exactly, because it has a scordatura and it has a rubber band on it, and you also were able to hear in the next page after the spider, this texture is created just with the rubber band. Musicians are playing on the rubber bands, and then the strings of the guitar, they just resonate on its own. So what we see here, that's not in the score, but I added the entrance of the amplifier of itself. I really like thinking about the nature of the instrumental object that I use, that are just there. You know, it could be the annoying buzz, and we can fight it and try to hide it, but we can also embrace it and write it in the piece. And I think these are my favorite moments when I find a way to do that. Of course, it doesn't come all the time. And then, so this here I was thinking a lot about the concept of a melody, because I already mentioned the voice and the singing, and how the guitars are singing. And here, so going back to Asymptotic Freedom 1, when all musicians they couldn't come together to rehearse a piece, there are parts, that piece that doesn't have a score. It has only 6 parts, and each on its own. So I wanted to integrate that idea as much as possible, even in this piece, in the second big version of it. So for me, the melody, it exists independently on its own as the second one, performer 2, performer 4. Here, orange and purple line, but also it's a shared melody that these 2 lines create naturally when they intertwine. And also what happens here, the layer of the feedback, the butterfly sound, it continues, and sometimes it hits the same pitches and create the 3rd layer. So this is another concept that is very important for me, is a multifaceted sound, multi-layered sound, so I could then either connect all of them at one point, or then unfold them and again create the distances between them and different perspectives, so I could play with this space. This is what I call sound space. How far am I as a listener from this sound? How do I perceive it? And I think in this way, the piece becomes, in this case, a 1-hour piece becomes a journey through these spaces that are unfolding and transforming and changing. And here I think I'm going ahead a little bit of the slides. Here I mentioned that this is how, this very technical image from book on acoustics, like everything in the composition, in a way, the translation, notation is also, first of all, let me mention that it's very important for me that I view notation as a language, not as a system of just notating something, fixating something. That's why more than 7 years ago now I quit Sibelius and I just started working by hand, which is not the most effective thing, of course, but it allows me to really integrate whatever language, symbols, whatever media I need to translate the idea, the musical idea, the conceptual idea, and they always come together. And here's like just 2 local examples of translating the inspiration of this acoustical space into, for example, composing sound space locally in the score. Like I mentioned, there is this individual melody, translation of a sound traveling directly, something that is very familiar because, of course, composing sound space for me is also dealing, and also just composing in general, dealing with perception and listening perception and being aware, trying as much as I can to be aware of the familiarity that comes into play with something like something as familiar as a plaque or a melody. And then second order reflection, first order reflection is the melody shared between the two instruments, melody shared between the three instruments. So we can look at some concepts and try to translate it in a very different way, very remotely connected to the actual acoustical phenomenon, but at the end it does communicate and does create certain experience that we're going for. So this is another way of looking at that, having this complex multi-layered sound that's coming at us straight away from the beginning of the piece, and then a little bit later, like a first order reflection, comes performer 4, just with the rhythmical noise, revealing one facet of this complex sound. It's like if the perception of, I don't know, the second overtone comes a little bit later, except that instead of the overtone harmonic, we have one facet of a complex sound, and then another one comes a little bit later, performer 5, with this ghost on the page, with a magnet swinging on the strings, revealing another facet of it, and so on and so forth. For me, composing is like weaving some material forward in time, and then, well, that's a very packed slide. So yes, this butterfly sound, I just was throwing concepts of very different hierarchical level, and actually very even different world, but just to quickly quickly to show how further on in the piece, and a lot of, or some of the sections that I mentioned we didn't hear today, they are very, very different character, very intense. Some of them are very loud. So they come all from this first cocoon of concepts that is what I call unwinding or revealing different facets, and sometimes they form the whole section, like for example, the presence of noise or appreciation of the nature of the amplifier eventually unfold into the jack cable section that comes right after I paused the music. Or for example, there is a section that I call desert section with the EBOs. So there are a lot of beatings and transpositions there that come eventually from the fluctuation, oscillation between the pitches in this butterfly sound. Let's see what we have here. And I'm sure I already mentioned most of it. Depending on a combination of sound parameters and sound qualities, our listening perspective, and again, what I mean by that, the distance in regard to the attention, to our listening attention towards a specific parameter of sound quality at a certain moment in time, and these interactions with one another. Here I will pause. I really like to think about space as different from a place. It's just my, we all use metaphor in a way that suits us, in a way that helps us create music, create a piece of art, and this is how I like to think about it. And for me, space, because I straight away think about the room, acoustical space, and interactions and reflections of the sound, it's first of all interactions between the elements, between the sources. So that's why I really like to think about that and how it can influence our perception.
I will try to put a light, maybe it's almost too much.
Too much?
Only for you, like this. Sorry.
See you later. So this sound space can unfold in time, change, suspend, transform, breathe, vibrate, and I believe it sufficiently enriches our listening experience when we get to that dimension of the work. And here is just Giuseppe realizing his freeze pedal. And I remember after the premiere, he really wanted to take this picture. And he said, "Freeze the space." So I just wanted to quote him on that. And since we are at our last slide, I can either open some space the last, I don't know how many minutes we are left with, for questions, or I can play another small section of a piece, if you prefer that, and have the question later or not have them at all. Please, any idea? Yes?
Just a little bit about the drawings you make in the... it's sorry for you, or it's also for the musicians to interpret?
Oh, it's in the score, it's for the musicians.
So for example, the spider, what represents for the musician?
It precedes the section that comes right after, in the brief right after the preferred. I don't know how it's preferred from here, but these textures of the rubber bands, it reminds me of this spider, and you know, the electric guitars, they can be also very present in the room, so it communicates the feeling of how to play. So they are always related to something in the sound that exists there.
Cool.
Yeah. Yes.
And did the performance change a lot using this kind of notation?
No, it's all very, very, very precise, actually. Very precise.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I will upload a new recording next week, so then we can compare, but it's pretty similar. Except maybe for the freestyling section that can change a little bit is the section in the score where there are the duo of feedbacks. I can quickly jump to it. It can change a little bit because I wanted it's a little bit improvisational. Where are the shapes? Here we go. Here it starts, and then at some point, for example, the shapes here they communicate that okay, the improvisational part has started, and still I guide them a little bit, but they are free to interact with the amplifier. For example, every other thing is notated pretty much precisely, and I'm very careful to, in the rehearsals we worked on the sounds a lot because it really matters how to play, how to touch, because with these preparations and the objects, the behavior of the strings also change a lot. Sometimes you touch them very softly, but then they react, and the musician has to really build a relationship with this instrument that is sort of on one hand familiar, on the other hand completely new, and this is what interests me, not just in this piece, but in general, to get to this point where there is some interaction with the instrument. I am always also a very tactile person. I was a pianist in the past, so it's probably embodied in my DNA to do everything through the touch, and it definitely translates into the music that I make and into the sounds and the interpretation that I'm after. Yes.
Just a follow-up question to the drawings of the spider. What's the difference for you between writing Play Like a Spider and drawing the actual spider? Because writing Play Like a Spider would be quicker, probably?
Because there's so much writing in general.
Okay, yeah.
So many words, and even sometimes in some scores, so I don't like to create legend separately. After a while I understood that a lot of performers really want effective things, Sometimes I either try to integrate everything on the page, and if it's too much, I put a transparent layer with instructions, so each page has a double that they can use while they can still see through the score, but then once they really familiarize themselves with instruction, they can remove it and have a smaller score. And yeah, because it takes time to read, you have to stop. But the spider is always there. And it's also interesting, of course, when I first started integrate some drawings, actually inspired by Elena Rykova a lot. We mentioned with some of the right lessons. Because his drawings are very effective, and it was important for me that, well, I love to draw, and sometimes, I don't know how about you, but I have to inspire myself during the process of composition, especially during the process of notation. So once I put something on the page that is inspiring to me, of course it will be inspiring to the performers, and I make sure that, after they receive the scores, I did want some feedback. And they were really, really happy to have something like that, just kind of inspiring them to move forward. Of course, it always with the sound. Drawings alone, it's a different dimension. It will be for the lecture in some art institute. But here we talk about music, and the connection is everything for me. Yes, please.
Hey, so just one question I had is this piece, I think, deals a lot with kind of an imagined spaces or an imagined space that you've kind of constructed, and then also you said it's quite a precise construction that you've made.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering how then the actual physical space in which this sound is performed in kind of maybe adds or subtracts or interferes or with that imagined space that you've constructed, and I guess it's been played a few times, right? In a few different places.
For times in 3 different places, and what I liked about that, that the actual physical space was, in my view, and actually it was brought up by the sound engineer, that the last space we played in, it was really interacting with the piece. Because it was so reverberant, but not too much, not too much to smear everything, but just to amplify those beatings, because there are so many microtonal beatings in the. I wanted this the space to vibrate, the actual space to vibrate, and of course different pieces, different, and of course it's still imaginary space here. And as for any piece of music, there are better spaces to perform. There are, of course, and we have to deal with that. But thankfully, with electric guitar, you can always add some reverberative spaces to dry, or the contrary. So that's why also I like the electric guitar so much, because the possibilities are endless and it's so adaptive. And we also were playing with dispositions. Sometimes I put them in one way, and then for the premiere performance they were in a very different disposition, and it always changes and brings something else. It's very important for me that the piece continues to live and to develop on its own, so that I can be after in relationship with it as well, to learn from it something about my work and how to move forward from that. It's like a mirror.
Yeah. But you haven't felt that any physical space has kind of been in conflict with the imagined space that you've created?
No. Yeah, we always arrive and then decided on one hand some technical things, like for example, mostly the amount of reverb, because it's like how dry it is. Because also the section of the pieces are so different that sometimes we don't need it at all, and actually the dry space really worked. But other than that, of course, the ideal space for me would be to surround the public fully, and we never had that experience. We had the closest we had was in Zurich. They were half surrounding the public. That was really great. I just really like the enveloping, immersive experience, and Yeah, that was great.
And it's maybe a bit of a boring question, but it's interesting too. But with your music, how do you approach rehearsing it?
Okay, if in regard to the notation, you can see that there is no bar line, there are no time signatures, always approximate time, but it cannot last for 50 seconds, let's say, instead of 20 or 28, as much as 26. It's always the general feeling of the piece, and also like it can last that much because you move forward and it can end. So what's important to me is the coordination between the performers, and it takes time to get through it, but not too much because they all come prepared. They learn their parts, and then they just take time to really learn the sound events in the other parts to react to them, because that's how they should listen and they should play just by listening, identifying and interacting with each other. Again, coming the word interaction. For example, I had rehearsals today earlier with Schauffeld, and I've learned that the score is done in a similar way, and they decided that the person responsible for electronics, he also conducts. And we had like 20 minutes to get through the piece, so I'm still I don't know, we couldn't change anything, but it has to be without the conductor. That's important, because then I think, why? Because the listening experience changes. Then you just look at your part and you wait for the sign, and that's, the tension is not there, and very, very, the performers should trust you, that's for sure. And I'm certain of it that not with every performer the experience of rehearsing my music would be the same. I mean, I know that, but some people, they are open, and then we can just go on a journey and continue. Even after this piece, we continued exploring it.
And as a composer, are you like in a rehearsal? Are you quite passive? Are you there listening?
They need me for sure. I mean, they also can rehearse without me, of course. But for the premieres, yes, they need me to also, mostly, I guess, to check the sounds, because it's very important how you touch the object. It cannot be. It is never mechanical touch. You always interact with the object, with the instrument, with each other. It's like the layers of interaction that happen, and for that you have to be aware of what's going on at any certain point in time. There are no parts. I don't use parts in my music. They all play with the score all the time, for those reasons. But so far it's been working. One thing that wasn't working is the very, very first piece that I did this way in 2015. I put stopwatch. And with this type of material, fragile material that changes, especially the feedback parts in this piece, it changes in regard to the space, you cannot time it. Then you just kill it. It's the other part. It's like on one hand there is a conductor, on the other hand there is a stopwatch, so I'm somewhere try to be somewhere in the middle in order to create this natural flow of music. That's very important for me.
So you said that for you the space and the place are different things, right? And if I understood correctly, for you this piece is like creating a space, right? Like the piece is the space that you're creating?
Both, I think. Because different sections in the piece, not just in this piece, but in any piece, it can go places. It can be a journey, but then the space, it can still happen all in the same space. So I could, as a listener, can find myself at the same distance from the music at different sections. And what I wanted to do, or to attempt to do in this piece, is through this 1 hour to change. Sometimes I'm very close, sometimes I'm very close to 1 or 2 facets of sound. So to kind of create the metaphorical translation of the small spaces or big spaces, or the space that is frozen, suspended, or it moves very fast or contracted. So this type of thing that I really wanted to work with.
But is it for you that those different experiences of the space, are they from the same space that you imagine, or is it different? I don't know if, what I imagine when you said that is that you are exploring kind of like this space.
Sound space?
Sorry?
Imaginary space?
Yeah, this sonic space that then you explore in different ways. And is that correct? Yeah, am I understanding it correctly?
I'm not sure.
Like, for example, the piece exists and it's like this imaginary sound space. And then your, the thing that you wrote is like an experience of that sonic space, or of different parts of it, or different ways of experiencing it. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, I think that's really cool. And, and I was wondering if, like, maybe there could be different experiences of that same space that could be like different versions of the piece, right? It's the same imaginary sound space, but you can explore it instead of like in the world, like in different orders, or maybe in different ways, maybe parts that you didn't explore. Like, is that something that you could conceive, kind of like a different exploration of the same imaginary sonic space?
Like different experiences of the same sonic space.
Yeah, and which end up being different pieces, but of that same.
Yeah, why not? It's yes, of course.
Like, would that be for you?
I mean,
the same
it's a nice
piece?
idea to try. I don't know if I feel in a way with this piece we are doing this maybe because with Samuel, who was dancing feedback, so to say, we are actually now going into the space of a solo piece, starting with this material, and for me this is the extension of the existing world.
I see.
So that could be a way to go, but
That's cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? I don't know. We are over time of the schedule. I'll be happy to play music, but if it's if it's over, it's over. I don't know. how do we go?
Whatever you want.
I don't know. Do you need to run somewhere? If I don't know. Would you like to listen to another beat or and
Yes.
then go? Okay, great. I can just maybe play. Let's see. Another 7 minutes of the very end. Or actually, no. I can just start playing, and then if you guys need to go, you can also.